Welcome to Refused Flank, a wargaming podcast exploring the intersection of competitive excellence and narrative storytelling potential. Start talking about that.
Okay, I've got that pulled up in front of me.
Oh, perfect. All right. Hey, everybody, this is Refused Flank. I'm Cam.
And I'm Grant.
And we're coming back at you with another episode, building up to our Orcs and Goblins versus Dwarfs battle report.
Yes.
And so today we're going to be talking about the scenario that we're going to be doing. It's a caravan raid scenario. We're going to get into some of the background of where this scenario came from. It's a custom one that we wrote, and then we'll talk through what that looks like, how it applies narratively to our two armies. But we're going to kick it off with just talking a little bit more about narrative scenario play in general. Grant, you put together a scenario for our group that we just played a few days ago.
Yes.
And it was very narrative. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was heavily inspired by the 8th edition expansion called Storm of Magic, which is what I just named the scenario, Storm of Magic. Now that, for those who aren't aware, had a big box with a book in it. It had like a Game of Life like spinner wheel in it where you would spin it and it would land on a lore of magic or whatever, and certain things would happen, like meteors would fall out of the sky. Really crazy zany stuff.
Okay.
And I wanted to lean into crazy zany stuff. I tried to introduce that to the players without giving anything away. Spoiler, maybe could have done that a little bit better, but that was what I was going for. I kind of wrote up this basic lore of they're on Albion, which is a island kind of like where Britain would be in the real world relative to the old world. And there's this crazy wizard Balthazar Mistmantle who has accidentally cracked open this thing to, I don't know, the Earth's core or something. And the winds of magic are now spurting up from underneath him into his tower, and he's built it up around it or whatever. And he's just harnessing untold power, right? And then that draws whatever factions to his doorstep, so to speak. So we just kind of introduced it as a 2K battle, and we tried doing closed lists, which I think looking back now I wouldn't do again because of a lot of the other things that resulted. But we don't typically do that in the full group very often. Usually everybody kind of posts their lists prior to the game day, unless it's like a one-off like you and me. Maybe we'll do more of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and like we've talked about on previous episodes, that's typically driven by just we're all still relatively new in the grand scheme of things. We haven't been playing 6th consistently since it came out in the early 2000s, and so it's just helpful for us to sort of check each other's lists, make sure people are taking things that make sense, that are actually legal in the list building and that sort of a thing.
Right, yeah, and I guess just jumping through it, I was, for rules, when I make scenarios, I'll have the idea of what I want in mind, but then for the grounding, I really like looking at other just basic scenarios. In this, I went to the Facebook group. Alexander Storch, I believe, puts together a really cool tournament pack for Resurrection, and he's got a bunch of different scenarios in there, and we've got those downloaded for our group, and we share them. And I was looking through those, and I found one that I really liked where there's this big center objective and 2 side ones to the left and right of the center, I think by like 18 inches. And it's just really control points, basically, and you're trying to be close. And whoever has more unit strength within 3 inches of a certain objective, you just kind of get extra points at the end. And I was like, okay, perfect. We'll have a big tower in the middle and some extra, like, smaller towers or arcane ruins or something on the board. And it'll be incentivized to go there. But then when people are there and near to it, bad things and crazy things will happen. So I thought, perfect, right? I did a pretty typical deployment. The only thing that really I changed there was I let people start closer up the board. I just really wanted people to start interacting with the objectives and thus the craziness a lot sooner. Most objectives in Warhammer Fantasy start up 12 inches, and this was 15. Again, turn 1, end of turn 1, you're like, for some armies, going to be across the halfway point.
Right, getting ready to set up your charge in turn 2.
So, really aggressive. And long story short, what would happen is lots of normal fighting, etc. But at the end of every round, I had pre-set up all these effects that would just happen. And I wrote up an entire document that I called the player-facing document and shared that with everyone with kind of the basic rules. And then I wrote another document for just myself that I have in front of me called Hidden Rules for Storm of Magic. And it was basically me just kind of waxing lyrically about what I wanted it to be. I kind of gave it some structure, and I would be like, round 1, the central tower, and I wrote Confundus Charm, and it was like, all units within 12 inches of the tower gain stupidity for the next turn, even if they would normally be immune to such an effect. Like I called out specifically because I knew you were going to do vampires. Like,
Sure.
we're just going to say the
Doesn't
undead
matter,
can be
yeah.
stupid. Don't think about it, And I was like, these spells are all as if it's irresistible force. There's no dispelling. This just occurs. But then I also thought, well, what about panic checks? Because we had a Beastman player, and then 2 other elves who were playing on a different board, same scenario. And I'm like, I don't want there to be somebody gets hit by a magic missile, their unit panics off the board turn 1, and they feel bad. So I was like, okay, he never, all the wounds or damage caused by this never causes panic. And essentially at the end of every round, something more and more crazy was the goal, would occur, crescendoing with Balthazar himself, the Mad Wizard, basically turning into a chaos spawn with a souped up profile, charging out, and then attacking whatever's closest, and if he dies, then the person who killed him gets extra VPs. But I had some pretty nuts stuff. The center objective would lift up, like it levitates.
Yeah.
Scatters 2d6.
That might have been my favorite part.
Scatters 2d6 away from the closest unit, and then if it lands on another unit, you'd minimally move them, and then they take 2d6 strength 4 hits because it landed on them. There's a lot of like just lightning sparking out. There was an AoE spell that would shoot out, and it was 3d6 minus the unit's weapon skill hits. So something weird like that. I called that Blade Wind. That was inspired by some stuff from 5th edition. I'm kind of waxing maybe too lyrically here. And then towards the end, I did one, I think it was at the end of round 4, where essentially whoever was closest to an objective on the outer one, that unit would switch sides. Because I thought going into this, what's going to happen is the center will most likely be contested, and one or other side, because they were kind of off-centered, will be more likely to be one or the other, and we'll just throw a complete monkey wrench into it and have 2 units literally switch sides. And on one board, we had Techless switch sides. And then on the other, we had a Doom Bowl and a unit of Minotaurs switch sides. So we had some pretty big switches that I think looking back maybe probably wasn't the most fun for certain players involved, which I can understand because it's like you invest all these points. And I didn't broadcast that this would happen. I just was like, don't expect a competitive game. This is going to be a lark or whatever. But that all happened, and it was super chaotic, I think. Although we got results that were both draws within 300
enough,
points. So
by the end of all the
pleased.
chaos. Yeah.
I don't know. What did you think, I guess?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, this was exactly the sort of wargaming experience that I like. I think it was unique for our group in that we had you acting as a games master who could kind of run the scenario. Playing. Yeah, and you could make calls on different things, which is just always useful anyways, even if you're not doing a crazy narrative scenario, to have someone who can just come in and make a neutral decision about a rules situation. But yeah, going into a scenario like this with the idea, like you told us, that it was going to be narrative, it wasn't going to be competitive, there was going to be chaotic, random stuff happening, is exciting. Because then for me, I don't have to get caught up in all of the competitive planning and like how am I going to optimize my list or be able to play it exactly this way, because you just can't plan for what's going to happen. So yeah, you even told us at the beginning of the evening to don't overthink deployment. Just like get your guys down and start moving, because it's going to turn into a chaotic mess pretty quickly anyways. And that was helpful for me to continue reframing how I was going to approach it and start playing even a little bit more, like taking on that sort of role-playing perspective as the general of the army. Like, this, I need to capture this magical tower because it's going to make my power even greater. And
I think what I should have done is leaned into that even more. I think I had a lot of that gusto towards the start, but then I think what unfortunately happened for me is that it get turned into kind of me being a rules reference of, hey, how do you do this? How do you? And then I would be like, oh, you do it this way, or I'd be like, that's a good question. Let me look it up.
Yeah.
Pardon me, and then kind of doing that for 2 tables. So I think I would try to kind of jump back into it at the end of every round. I said, tell me when you're at the end of the round, because then the big things will happen. But I had even more planned. I have a random terrain effects chart I was going to roll every time somebody ended in a piece of terrain. I had just a D6 chart I made, and it's like you roll a 1, nothing happens. You roll a 2, they found a well of healing water, and you just would heal D6 wounds on the unit up to their max, so people could just resurrect. And then I had the terrain comes alive and hurts you. I had mad fungus that made the unit gain hatred for the rest of the battle. And then I had there was Portal of Chaos, which I thought was fun, which was basically a unit takes a bunch of hits, but then they basically teleport 4d6 inches in any direction, and they can count as charging. Wow. So the thought is your unit gets smacked really hard, but 2d6 strength 4 hits, but then you could be but I'm going to charge that unit you roll high or whatever, 15 inches over there. And it's just that's crazy insanity. And then I had one Altar of Chaos, which was if there's a character in the unit, he gets a buff. But if the unit has no character, then D3 guys just die. No saves allowed of any kind because they're unworthy. Things like that. So I had all this stuff, but I quickly found out, especially for 2 tables going on, it was very difficult even turn 1 to be on top of, oh, hey, he ended there. So that was maybe something I would invest less time into, especially if I'm going to be looking at multiple tables. But those were the ideas. I really wanted to maximize the chaos. I wanted to be who knows what's going to happen? Just kind of go with it, because I think sometimes, as you've mentioned, and I think a lot of people can experience this, the game can really bog down in the movement phase. And in other phases too. I mean, there's a lot of decisions to be made in Warhammer Fantasy, and I think we can all become susceptible to analysis paralysis. And I was really trying to, and we were doing this on a weeknight on a 2,000 point game. So we were ambitious. But we proceeded through there, and I just really wanted everybody to keep it a good pace, keep it light. Let's just go, airy. When something came up, I'd be just do this. It's funnier, or do that, whatever. Who cares? And just kind of left it at that. But overall, I think it was a pretty good success. But what was even better is I think I learned some lessons that I could take with me.
Yeah.
Just about both explaining what I'm going for maybe a little bit. I think I kept my cards too close to the chest, because especially when the sides turn spell, I think some people are oh my gosh, Teclis costs 630 points for one guy, so it's just he's just well, okay, I guess I lose, and I'm well, he'll still count as if he's alive, he goes back to you at the end of the battle for VP, but it was just I've just lost half my army instantly. And so I could see trying to explain that maybe a little better, to be hey, literally, because I was just it's not going to be competitive. I'm going for craziness, but I didn't say anything else because I really wanted it to be unpredictable.
Yeah,
I didn't want you to know what was going to happen, but I think I maybe need to be a little more open about hey, expect random movement, expect guys to just get hit randomly because and not because you did anything wrong. You're probably playing correctly, but it might just happen.
Yeah.
So
the winds of magic are fickle.
Indeed, and hence Storm of Magic.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun kind of jamming it. Those are the types of things that get me excited about the narrative of the game. I think I'm kind of like a lot of people who, when I'm playing the game, I want to be in the narrative, but I get really, the game is so engrossing for me, and I get really sucked down into that sometimes. But when you're just jamming it, and you can kind of be free to be oh, Balthazar, ooh, he totally lifted up. He landed on the Bestigors with his tower and just killed a few of them or whatever. Oh man, that was crazy or whatever. And we have these really cool towers that you have. One's a hand emerging from the earth, and the other was this, for the other tables, this skeleton, kind of evil looking tower, and just really great terrain. Cam does an excellent job. And, it just really came together. Maybe we'll post some photos. I don't know. We've got a bunch of them.
Yeah.
We'll make a post. But, learned a lot about scenario design, setting expectations, and articulating that to the players as somebody putting together this scenario. And I think, though, I could run this again, maybe with different people, and just switch some things up, and it would still work.
I think so too. I think you could run it with the same people and switch things up.
You're probably
and
right.
It would probably still be fine.
You're probably true. It'd almost be funny to see, now that you know what happens, how people play differently.
Right.
Then they'd probably just play gun lines. but who knows?
I would hope people don't do that.
Yeah,
but
we'll
you never
see.
know.
Yeah.
I think for me it was helpful as just an exercise in recognizing again that people approach wargaming with different perspectives and different expectations. And as I mentioned before, for me, this is like the pinnacle of a wargaming experience for me because it focuses so much more on the story and really helps me disengage from feeling too competitive in a negative, bad way. And so I love this, and I've always just kind of expected, well, as soon as, even if somebody else doesn't love that, as soon as they get to try it for the first time, they will love it too. And that's just not necessarily the case. Not everybody enjoyed it as much as everybody else. And so I think it was just helpful for me to, as a reminder, to recognize that whatever opponent you might be playing, you might both be coming to the wargaming experience with different expectations, different goals of what you want to get out of that experience. And I think the more that you can communicate about that, the better, because then you're less likely to get into awkward situations where people are not having as good of a time as they might be otherwise, because they're assuming that, oh, you didn't want it to be like it is right now.
Right. Yeah. Me being like, hey, I said it was going to be crazy. And they're like, yeah, well, I didn't expect this though. Crazy, and I'm like, oh, fair. I guess. Yeah. I don't know.
And on the other end, I mean, I think I may have shared this in a previous episode, but if you're going in expecting a casual game and somebody brings a tournament list and they're just eviscerating you, that's equally unfun due to mismatched expectations, just kind of going the other way. And that's, something that happened to me early on as I was getting back into wargaming with some AOS stuff. And it just wasn't a fun experience for me when I didn't realize that's what I was stepping into this much more competitive, highly tuned list type of a situation that I obviously did not have and did not bring something that could stand up against that. So I think on either side, not to say that one is better than the other. Yes. And like we've said, we're hoping to explore kind of both sides of that with this podcast. Where is the
meeting point, right?
But I think your scenario the other night, this Storm of Magic, was an example of kind of going really far the narrative way, where if you come into this expecting to have any control over winning, then you're not going to have as good of a time. And I think it can be difficult for me sometimes to separate those two things from my worth and value as a human and whether I won or not. Sure. And those shouldn't be connected anyways, I don't think, because I don't think that's necessarily healthy. But I think in a narrative scenario like this, you just can't, because you have so little control over what's going on that if you do feel like that, then you'll just end up feeling bad by the end of the game. But it can be hard to, again, separate those things.
Well, we spend so much time on this hobby. Right. Yeah. So it's, you slave. I feel like our group especially, we really try to play painted pretty darn well. Mm-hmm. Everybody's really slugging it. And I see online, this just hordes of gray. But I know like a lot of our guys are just putting in hours. And Warhammer Fantasy, even 6th edition, takes a lot of models. So we're playing painted for the most part, I would say the vast majority of the time. And we're sinking all this time in. You're writing your lists, you're thinking about it, if you're anything like me anyway. Yeah. And when you get there and there's all this build up, there's the excitement, and then you get there and I could easily see being like, oh man, I just had a plan. I was going to execute. Yeah. I was doing well, and then just
feels like a rug pull.
Yeah. Not great. Nonsense occurred. Mm-hmm. And I could totally understand that. So I think it goes back to, me establishing those expectations. Maybe I should have had a sort of session 0. Now, I don't want to go over the top about it, though, because I don't think every custom scenario necessarily needs that. No. Really, what you really need at the end of the day is you just need friends who are understanding and are cool.
And by the end of the night, everybody was. Right. And so even though the experience throughout the night varied from person to person, I think by the end we all recognized that it was an enjoyable experience. Everybody in the end had fun with kind of the chaos of it. Right. And I think that was good. And I think that maybe in some ways this was the session 0 for narrative play in general. And maybe it's helpful that it went kind of farther in that direction, because now the next thing might be, less than that, and then, work out better that way. But I think I would agree, if you're doing like a one-off narrative scenario, a session 0, I don't know that that's necessarily necessary. Maybe I'll hop on Discord while you're doing painting together or something and can chat through some expectations more or whatever. But yeah, I think you've already mentioned this, but trying to GM 2 tables at once, I think also was particularly difficult.
Yeah, that was hard.
Curating the experience in the way that I think you wanted to. Yeah. And so I think that's something. I had
like lines written for Balthazar to say for each spell, but I wrote down like Confundus Charm. Like I had names for all the spells that were going to occur, but I quickly just dropped that because I was looking at my phone all the time, trying to keep the Google Doc I had open with all my notes. And I was quickly just like, okay, whatever, this is what happens, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that got kind of lost along the way. And then also just watching the battles, because that's fun too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I would encourage listeners to, if something like this sounds interesting to you, give it a try. Be the one to step up and offer to be the GM and kind of run things. And you could start it with something that is much more of a basic scenario, but you do just introduce a few wrenches in the works, so to speak, that you kind of throw out a couple times throughout the game. It doesn't need to be groundbreaking things every single turn or anything like that. But then also being able to be that neutral arbiter throughout the experience. And then maybe you'll find that your group does enjoy that, and it helps everybody. You can inject a little bit of that narrative, but also have that neutral third party that helps grease the wheels of the game so that it can keep moving along and make some calls so that nobody feels like we're making the decision that is better for you or worse for me or whatever kind of a thing. It can be that third person. And I think that's something that wargaming used to have a lot more of and now has much less of as it's become further from its RPG roots and more into this sort of competitive space. But I just want to shout out a couple other YouTube channels that I think do this really well. Little Wars TV
I love them.
Is one that has a lot of really good games mastered scenarios that they'll play out in a bunch of different systems and periods. They're much more historically oriented, but would definitely recommend checking them out if you want some more inspiration along these lines. And then also Games Night, that's plural, Games Night, is some guys that do even more off the wall stuff. I just watched one the other night. It was like a Jurassic Park scenario, and somebody was playing as the dinosaurs and somebody was the scientist trying to escape and
Did
stuff.
they write their own rules?
I think they said that they did, but I also saw something about maybe there was an actual miniatures game coming out, so I don't know if it was connected to that somehow or something, but didn't catch that part in the beginning. But anyways,
sounds neat.
Yeah, they do all sorts of really fun stuff, like Indiana Jones things in World War II kind of stuff using bolt action. And but there's this one guy that is always GMing these and introducing new rules. They did one with the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game, but the first portion of the scenario played out with totally new mechanics just to help a larger battle sort of take place. And then once it neared the end, then they went into the normal strategy battle game rules and things like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think that's just a great resource for A, entertainment, but also B, inspiration for how you can approach these types of GM'd game experiences. And so highly recommend both of those, Games Night and Little Wars TV. But yeah, I think...
From there, do you want to just talk about the next battle and the next scenario?
Yeah, so what we just talked about, the Storm of Magic thing, just happened for us this week, so we wanted to share a little bit of that, this idea of narrative stuff, as we now pivot into talking about the scenario that we're going to do for our upcoming Greenskins versus Dwarfs battle report. And this will be replaying a scenario that we wrote for our previous Warhammer Fantasy Slow Grow campaign, and it was a caravan raid scenario. And the way that we did that campaign, we've maybe mentioned this a little bit in previous episodes, was something we're starting to call an emergent narrative style campaign. So rather than having fixed battles that are going to happen or territories that are clearly delineated on a map that you're invading or things like that, what we'll do is we'll play a round of battles and then have some story that sets that all up. And then once the battles are complete, we can assess the situation and sort of think through, okay, now that this happened, what would my guys want to do next? And we can look at the map and sort of decide where we're going to go, how we're going to plan the next battles. And so this came out of that approach. And so in the first round of the campaign, we had, I guess this was one that I played, my own Dwarfs versus our friends Dark Elves. And so the first round stuff that had happened was I had an engineer, Yorith Grundaz, defending a lumber camp in the jungle against your lizards and Croxagors.
Yep.
And they lost, so they were scattered and kind of fleeing through the jungle trying to regroup. I had another contingent of dwarfs up against the Bretonians, who also lost as they were looking for clues to the location of the secret temple of Teotihuacan,
which was the MacGuffin
of the whole campaign. We're all looking for this hidden temple city. And so they were scattered as well. And then I had successfully defended my mine over on the coast from the Dark Elf raiders. And so the way that all then sort of materialized was like, okay, I've successfully defended the mine, and I need to get some of this magical ore that we're taking from these old lizard men temples back across the jungle to the mountains where my dwarf hold is, so that we can utilize this stuff. So I will be sending this ore caravan through the jungle, which will of course be perilous. and my other forces are trying to regroup with the rest of the dwarfs. And so as that's happening, who would probably be most wanting to attack me? The Dark Elves, because they just lost this battle against me. So what if the Dark Elves are attempting to raid this caravan as it makes its way through the jungle? And then my remaining dwarf forces serve as sort of a relief force that can come in later in the game as they finish regrouping together and provide a little bit of reinforcements for the beleaguered caravan as it's under attack by this raid. So that was sort of the narrative lore stuff that, again, just emerged from how the campaign was going at that point. And with that in mind, then we could just start thinking, okay, what sort of a scenario would model this or create that type of an experience? I remember there's a story, it was either in a White Dwarf or in the Dwarf book, I can't remember now where I actually read it, but of a dwarf caravan that kind of like pulls off to the side of the road and they form a shield wall on a hill or something and they're defending it as this last stand kind of a thing. Their backs are up against some water or something.
Okay.
And so that served as sort of some additional inspiration as I was writing this scenario. The idea being that it's just off the jungle road, but there's pretty dense jungles around. The caravan has been pulled over. The dwarfs have formed up a defensive line kind of tightly around it. And then the enemy is coming to attack. So that sort of sets the stage for where this scenario came from initially. We played it. It was kind of cool. I think narratively it felt right. We came up with some interesting ways to score victory points. And so the Dark Elves, their whole thing in the campaign was trying to capture loot and prisoners. And so every time they attacked dwarf units or the caravan, they could potentially get some of that. And then whoever had the most loot counters at the end of the battle would win. And so that was a pretty easy way to have victory conditions that focused it on what was actually supposed to be happening narratively.
Just kill points or victory points, which a lot of games can kind of
devolve into.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, it worked out pretty well. I think a couple things didn't. One was the way that the relief force came in and the fact that it was a dwarf relief force meant that the dwarf relief force never actually made contact with the enemy. We were playing on a full 6-foot table, but in our slow grow had only reached the 1,000-point level. And so there really wasn't enough troops to fill up the whole battlefield and things were kind of happening centrally. And in the original scenario, the relief force came in from only the short edges. And so they started pretty far away and then were just slowly trekking across the board as the game finished up a little bit.
It was a double whammy too, because it was Dark Elves versus Dwarves, so it's not only just Dwarves being slow, but it's also Dwarves against one of the faster movement speed factions, so it was just like, did they get in to do anything?
The relief force did not.
Yeah.
They did nothing. Yeah.
So, that was kind of one of the big takeaways. What was the result of that battle? I don't recall.
The Dark Elves won that battle. Yeah. They secured enough loot. And another aspect of it was that once a unit had some loot counters, they could just leave the battlefield to secure them so that they couldn't be lost by the unit being destroyed later. The idea of how it was meant to play out is that there would be an overwhelming force at the beginning that would definitely be able to start picking apart the smaller defenders' force and get some of those loot counters initially before the relief force shows up. And so it was supposed to feel kind of lopsided at the beginning there. And I think that successfully worked and created that feeling of a desperate defense of, are we going to be able to hold out long enough before our friends kind of come, sort of a thing. So it was really fun. I think it got a lot of the way there, and I still had a lot of fun playing it, even though I technically lost because it felt like I was playing the story that was supposed to be happening. And so that was a lot of fun. But all that being said, as we were thinking about what we were going to do for the Dwarf and Orcs and Goblins battle, this scenario came to mind as an opportunity to rework it a little bit and use it again and see if we could work out some of those kinks that were in it. So that's what we're planning on doing. We've made a few adjustments to it. But
the general, we're going after loot points. That's the same. You don't start with all of your forces on the board. There are reinforcements, but we've adjusted mainly how they come on the board is the big one, so that they can actually be involved. And then also, didn't we adjust something else? I came prepared, now I've forgotten. But that's the big one, is really how you get on. Yeah, so originally I had written the scenario to be 8 turns long, and starting on turn 4, you would roll a die, and on a 4+, the relief force would show up. And then, as is normal in a lot of scenarios, it goes down by 1 each successive turn until they come on automatically at the end. And I think I even rolled pretty well when we did that initially, but even so, that's just not enough time for the dwarfs. So you suggested maybe make it start on turn 2 and roll per unit. So it's not an all or nothing, the whole relief force or none of it shows up. But that way I think was a good idea to help things happen a little bit more piecemeal and not feel like I'm getting nothing or then the attacker feel like everything just showed up. Right. What was my advantage?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that we'll find out whether that works or not. We also adjusted that the entry point can now be either of the short edges or the long edge in the dwarf half of the board.
Yep.
So you have a little bit more control over where you're coming on. And then because the idea is sort of that this relief force was a friendly scouting patrol that just happened to be in the area and the runners ran into to, carry the distress signal, or they heard the horn blast or whatever, that they also can emerge from a piece of terrain, like a piece of woods or jungle terrain, depending on the theming of your board.
Yeah.
And so the unit, they have to start fully within that piece of terrain, and so that obviously will slow them down for a turn or two. But
they
that
could
just gives
potentially
you
show up behind somebody's army,
or in a slightly more advantageous position or something to create some threat. So we'll find out how that goes. Maybe we overcorrected and adding all 3 of those changes will be too much. But yeah, we'll find out. We also are shortening the game to just 6 turns in total. We'll see how that goes. But I think starting the relief force sooner will
8
probably
turns
work out.
Is quite lengthy.
Yeah.
Even though probably in a small game like we did before, I imagine the last few of those were quick back and forths, the last 2 or 3, but 6 has been a pretty good sweet spot. Usually by then the game's starting to die down anyway.
Yeah, it seems like they knew what they were doing when they chose 6 as the common turn.
Yeah, they kind of figured it out pretty well.
But yeah, we'll post this scenario if you guys want to check it out. Just to go through a couple more of the mechanical things, the way the loot tokens work is each defending unit that starts on the board starts with 6 loot tokens, as well as the caravan marker itself. And if you had the 7th edition starter box, the little mining cart that comes with that is a great use for this if you're playing dwarfs as your defending force. So that's what we'll be using, but you can use it as a modeling opportunity, make a cool little cart, caravan.
Kit bash.
Yeah, something like that could be fun. I built another one out of popsicle sticks and coffee stirrers that we used for a different scenario as well.
Built a siege tower out of popsicle sticks and all sorts of
stuff. Yeah, popsicle sticks and coffee stirrers will take you a long way. And then essentially how you get these loot markers is anytime the attacker wins a combat against an enemy unit with loot tokens, they get to roll a d6 and add the difference in combat res. And if they get 7 or more, then they get a loot token. So it's sort of this like slower, you can be stealing prisoners and some loot from, I guess the idea is more that the loot is in the cart, but you're getting prisoners if you're beating the units in combat is the idea. But if you wipe out an enemy unit, then you get all of the tokens that they had left.
Sure.
And that's only in melee, because obviously if you're just like blowing them up with artillery or shooting them from a distance, they're dead now. You can't take them prisoner.
Right.
And then if you get in base contact with the caravan marker itself and aren't also in melee with an enemy unit, you just get 2 tokens per turn. So you can just be slowly picking through those things. And then the defending force cannot recapture any of the loot after it's been captured. So the only way they can really control that is if they wipe out a unit holding loot markers, they lose all of those loot markers, but they won't transfer back to the defender. So yeah, that's how that works. Another thing we added for the rewrite of the scenario, which was at least partially inspired just by the matchup that we happen to be doing, is something that we're calling old grudge points.
Yep.
Just for a little bit of extra flavor. So the way that we're having this works is it's just like loot points, but flipped, so the defender can get these tokens. We're calling them glory tokens from the enemy. And after deployment, the way that it's written to be a more generic scenario is that the defender picks an enemy unit from the attacker's force as unit that they have an old grudge against that's been terrorizing the countryside for a while, and then they start with 6 of these glory tokens, and then the defender's army can collect them in the same way that they would collect them. So for us, it's just the opportunity to, knowing that the Orcs and Goblins are going to bring some trolls, and it gives us the opportunity to have the Dwarfs bring a Slayer hero, like we said we never would in a normal game.
Slayer.
Yep. And then a unit of Slayers. It just creates a cool little narrative thing of like, yes, these trolls have been coming down from the mountains and terrorizing us, so we finally caught up with them, and we're going to take care of them once and for all.
I'm excited to vomit.
Yeah.
Although maybe not against Slayers. No, you don't have any armor, so we're just going to whack you, I guess.
Yeah, that'd probably be more effective. And then in terms of victory, whoever has more of these tokens at the end will win. So whether the Dwarfs are able to hold on to them or wipe out units that took them, kind of a thing. And then if you have 2 times the tokens as your opponent, you get a major victory. If you just have more but not double, minor victory. And then otherwise a draw if it's equal, of course. So that's how that's going to play out. We'll be talking in our next episode a little bit about the specific lists that we're going to be bringing and relate that back to the scenario and kind of how we think that they'll operate in terms of this scenario, who's in the relief force for the defenders, who's in the vanguard guarding the caravan, etc., etc. But we just want to round out this episode talking a little bit about some narrative ideas we have for the scenario already and how it's going to relate to the Greenskins. As I already described, this scenario initially came out of that campaign that we already did. I already have names for my characters that were involved in this. I have a name for the dwarf hold that's in the mountains near the Southlands, the jungle that this all took place in, which is Karazagandak, which, again, like we mentioned, using the language literary stuff in the dwarf book at the back. Yeah, you can look up what that means, but Gandak would be an adjustment of a word that means explorer. So it'd be sort of like the city of explorers or something like that, because it's so far south. It's sort of this outpost of dwarf exploration.
I like it.
Pushing into the Southlands.
Must be a bunch of young dwarves.
Yes. Trying new things.
Yeah.
And that actually is kind of how it played out. Elwyn Branicle, who was my sort of protagonist in the last campaign, was a plucky runesmith trying to take stone and ore from these lizardmen temples that were imbued with magical properties and then turn it into rune golems that he could activate on the battlefield. So definitely not something sanctioned by the rune masters.
That went in somebody's book.
Yeah, definitely. But anyway, so I think for me, I'm going to keep that idea that we're still, like, this is maybe post that campaign happening. The Bretonnians found what they thought was the Holy Grail and left the area. The Dark Elves had found enough prisoners and loot to go back and impress the Dark Lord. And the Lizardmen recaptured Teotihuacan and now are still a thorn in the dwarf side, but we're kind of on the northern side of the jungle still, and so defending it a little bit, but still have that coastal mining operation out of the temple there that we've recaptured from the Dark Elves after they left, and so we're still trying to move ore across this jungle road to get it from the coast back to the mountains and to the hold. So I think for me, that's kind of the same thing. And then I can imagine that, okay, the Greenskins, the Badlands are kind of just north of here.
Right.
So maybe they're kind of starting to come down through into the jungle. But I don't know, what ideas do you have from your side?
For me, I didn't prepare for this as much. I admit I was working so much on the Storm of Magic one this past week.
Understandable.
But looking into this narratively, I was reading a lot of old White Dwarf battle reports that we just have saved in our collective kind of shared drive we have. And I was reading through a lot of Orcs and Goblins in those battle reports, and just kind of reading through how Alessio and all the other developers and designers would kind of talk about their list design philosophy and how they got characters together. One name stuck out for me was Gitface. I think it was early on in 6th edition. They had this battle report between Orcs and Goblins and Empire. And it was just an orc war boss. You know, he wasn't anything like super crazy over the top, and I won't go into my build for Gitface yet, but that name just stuck out to me.
It's a good one.
And for me, that made me think of kind of like maybe he's not like, he's actually not a war boss. Sorry, he's a big boss, because we're not going to be playing 2,000 points. I don't know if
we'll talk about that. That's
yet.
Fine. We'll talk about why.
But he's
in the
a
next
big
episode.
boss, and I'm thinking he's maybe been put down by his war boss. Maybe he's been kicked out. He's a dude who's got a lot of goblins he's working with. He's got his one big posse, but he's down on his luck. Face.
I like it.
And I think he's looking to make a name for himself. He's been disgraced, and he heard about these dwarf fellows, and he doesn't care. I mean, he cares about the loot, but it's more as a show of his ability that he wants to get it. He wants to beat these guys and then have proof that he did it.
Yes,
so he can go back and show his war boss, look what I did. Gitface, and then maybe he won't be Gitface anymore.
I love it.
That's kind of what I was going for. But yeah, and I won't go too much into the list, but that part of this whole hodgepodge is kind of what I'm going for thematically, I guess. It's all the outcasts.
I think that's great, and I think that works really well with the makeup of the army we have available for the Greenskins, which, again, we'll talk about in more detail in the next episode. But, I love it. So there you go. We've got a little bit of a narrative setting up how we're going to be coming into this scenario. The scenario itself has some narrative elements to it already. It's not just your standard pitched battle, but we hope it'll play out a little bit more evenly or balanced, whatever that means, than it did the first time. And hopefully this is inspiring for you to write
Right.
your own scenarios to, even if you're not doing a campaign, just think about what was the last battle that happened between my army and whatever army you're about to play. And like, could we imagine that this is somehow connected story-wise from there to here? If you've started naming your characters, what stories have they begun to have told about them because of what they've done on the battlefield and things like that? And all of that can be good inspiration. But if you've done anything like that, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you've got scenarios you've written up that you think we should try, we'd love to have you share those write-ups with us so that we can try them out between ourselves with our group. I think we're always open to trying out new things.
I would love to see some advice too for many of the people that come up with the crazy stuff, or maybe the not so crazy stuff. How do you handle expectations? How do you handle managing multiple tables? I know there's guys who run these big events.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it.
They'll do like a day where it's more competitive, but then they'll have a day where it's like maybe not as crazy as what I did, but like more narrative driven, right? So how are they navigating that? Is there a best way? Do they just have like a run book in front of them? Did they print something off? I didn't do that. I was going off my phone. Maybe that was a mistake. But I'd just be curious to hear the advice of those who've gone before me. I want to stand on the shoulders of giants. So
well said. I think one more thing I want to say that I am now just thinking of that I didn't say at the beginning, but the GMing approach opens up the opportunity to have surprises for the players.
Yes.
If you don't have a GM, then you end up having to rely on something that's either pre-written, but everybody kind of has full knowledge of how everything's going to play out.
Right.
Or you have a chart that has some random things that could happen. I think a good example of that is in the Lustria supplement for 6th edition.
Yeah.
They have some charts of like events that can happen before the battle or during the battle where like a rainstorm starts or there's quicksand and things like that can suddenly appear. And those are cool, and I think a really great option if you don't have somebody to be the GM, but it's, I think, a lot more exciting as an immersive experience for the players if they don't see things coming and they don't know what is on that chart of random things that can happen. And it also, if you trust your GM, just like if you're playing a role-playing game, you know, you're doing D&D or Call of Cthulhu or something, there's this sort of contract between the players and the GM that they are going to fairly arbitrate things for the sake of telling a good story. And so if you trust the person who's running your games in that way, then you can trust that they will, it may not all be fully planned out. They may choose to have the quicksand affect a specific unit during this specific playthrough of the scenario.
Maybe
because
they didn't roll for it that one time because it just made sense in that moment. And So
I think if you can build that level of trust with somebody who's going to do that type of GMing, that can elevate the experience even more. But if you don't have that, again, just relying on like, well, that's what the dice said, and you've said this before, but let the dice tell the story, and you can have a lot of fun that way as well.
For sure.
But yeah, we'd love to hear from you in the comments and about the sort of experiences you've had with that. But that wraps up this episode, and we'll be back next week with a discussion of our list that we are going to play the scenario with.
Get Face is coming. See ya.
Bye.